Hi,
Hello,
can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Good. And yourself?
Good. Tired but well. Have a nice weekend.
Tired? Yeah, I had a great weekend. Yeah, we had maybe 5 or 6 days free of a Chinese New Year. Um, yeah, I had a good time meeting people, going to dinner with various families, and working on the school, just painting. We have students here 6 days a week, so there's no time to actually get stuck into some work. So it's a lovely
Take advantage
opportunity
of the
to.
holiday breaks to do things that you can't do in the regular stream. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is that growing up, I had to paint our house inside and out every year. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but when I had the chance to paint our school, it's exciting. Like I feel so happy to take care of the building and to make it more beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I hear you. Good for you.
yeah.
Good for you. I appreciated the story about Donnie. I hope that goes somewhere.
Yes, I want to talk to you later about where that could go, and maybe how we can offer some help to him. Um, yeah, he's a lovely guy. I've met him maybe 5 or 6 times, and it'll just be for 20 minutes, an hour here and there by chance, right? And we had a big group of people, and then he'll always come and find me, and then we'll just have a conversation. And he's I think he's like quite a good leader. He from the way he describes his approach, he sounds like a great guy. But he's very humble, very gentle, very kind. And like yesterday, I asked him, or the day before, about decision making, and he said he feels that he's very bad at making decisions. But then when you go back and you unpack, actually, I think he's excellent at making decisions. But maybe he understands that you can't make perfect decisions, and you have to make the decision, take action, get the feedback, and then reiterate over time. But anyway,
Yeah.
he's a really great guy.
Yeah. And the humility actually helps him make decisions better than the arrogance that he thinks he's making them perfect all the time.
Right, right. So I love this guy. Like, when I first met him, he was just so humble and gentle, and I find out that he's like in control of like quite a big department and has a lot of managers underneath him. But he's just so gentle and kind. But the interesting thing is that he said it maybe took him until his 30s to begin to make the shift. So like my students that I teach, they'll tell me that in class they don't talk. Like I had two students who were like top of the school. They went to the best university in Taiwan, but at school they would never answer a question because they were worried that if they answer the question, they will be blamed if they make a mistake. So
Yeah.
they don't even talk. They don't speak.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Donnie said like he was the same until he
Yeah.
was 30, 35. He just was so worried about making the right decision, so worried about being correct, that he held himself back. And then it was only in his 30s that he kind of figured out how to enjoy the process of learning and take, like when you do something, it's not right or wrong, it's a result. It's like doing a science experiment. You take action, you get a result. The result isn't right or wrong, it's feedback. Anyway, so it took him a long time to figure this out, and he's kind of thinking, how do I help my own children to make this
Yeah.
shift, right? They're in
Yeah.
junior high, and then he kind of feels a sense of regret that he spent too much time at work and not enough time interacting with his own children. And maybe his focus now is thinking, how can he help them with school? But I think some of your ideas, like the miraculous intersection, might be exactly what he's ready for. What could help him
There's
best.
one of the thing that comes up listening to you describe him and your own experience in the kids in school and what have you, which I think is a really important distinction that kind of precedes the miraculous intersection but builds a pathway to it, is the insidious curriculum, right? There's a tendency to think, well, we are this reluctant, we're this hesitant to put ourselves forth, and we're so averse to the feeling of shame. And ultimately that's what it is, right? It's almost like somewhere deep in our core doesn't want to feel that. Right. It's not, we have all these ways of describing it out on the surface of our mind, but it's like at a much deeper level. It's just like your you know, you don't want to touch something hot, right? I mean, it's a really deep core level.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel that shame anymore. And I'm going to start doing things even before I'm aware of it to avoid that happening.
Right.
And that's not learned by single episodes. I mean, there can be single episodes that are highly traumatic that cause that, where somebody's really spotlighted in a public way that's humiliating and causes an enormous spike of shame. The bigger problem is, though, is the chronic background of the way everything works. It's not the episodic things we're paying attention to. It's the thousands of times that happens that ingrains it, so to speak, as a reflexive aversion, not the particular things that we remember as the episodes that we've labeled it with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, people are maybe almost not even really aware of it. It's almost unconscious.
Exactly.
You don't notice that this thing is holding you back.
Back to one of our previous conversations, back to the Insidious Curriculum, and then we'll move from there. This is the point of it, right? That it's how many times are kids having the experience of having some kind of a learning need or meaning need that's fluctuating in their body, in the core of their being, but shutting it down, not acting on it, avoiding it, you know? And I would argue that for most kids, that's happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times, right? And it's just kind of blurring and dulling their sensitivities to those fluctuations, right? And this is what leads to the propensity for I mean, there's cultural reasons too, but this is what leads to this awkward reluctance to put oneself out, right? Is this deep insecurity in feeling confident in yourself. And like we talked about once before, never met a toddler that said, you know, I'm going to give up on walking.
Yeah.
That kind of distrust in learning is learned. And it's not learned by single episodes. It's learned by the chronic background of the way the whole enchilada works in school and in home. And that's what we talk about. What are we going to do about this? That's why it's so important to change the orientation of the system, because focusing on this episode and this episode, we can tweak them all we want. If the background radiation of the whole thing continues to create this dampening, aversion yielding, you know, tunnel that these kids are going through, it's not going to change much.
Yeah. That brings up the whole question of what do we do? What do we do? Right.
So like in our last exchange, we were talking a little bit in the messaging that I think my response to the question about parents was, first of all, parents and teachers both need to, you know, be coming from this place of being stewards, right, of the healthiness of the learning of their children, whether they're a parent or they're a teacher. That, I mean, whether you care about their physical health, their emotional health, their academic achievement, their ability to relate to themselves, their nutritional health, how well they get along with their neighbors or friends or buddies or whatever you care about, right? Yeah. Ultimately, the destiny of that thing you care about is connected to how healthy that child learns.
I think maybe some parents pull back from taking care of the health of their child's learning because maybe we've come to see education as the domain of the school. Maybe parents feel, I don't know how to help my child with this problem, so I'm going to leave it to the professional, so to speak.
Right, but that's why, you know, and let me just parenthetically pause our conversation for a second and go process level for a moment and say, at some point, we'll explicitly say, we're going to talk miraculous intersection so that we can chop that out to serve our purpose. Okay.
Right.
So we can go in and out of that between my editing and your editing, and we'll worry about all that stuff. So we'll just go in the flow.
Perfect.
I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything back of your head running about
Sure.
This is why I start learning stewards with the thing. There's nothing that's going to happen until we reframe our conception of learning itself.
Yeah.
Because what you were just describing about parents and the way they think about this in school, learning is what happens in school, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying is how do we get them past that point, right?
Because no matter the person, right? If you really can dialogue with them, if you can have a conversation with them, you can reveal to them, get them to start recognizing they are who they are because of their learning. That it needs to be a first person real shift in how they think about learning, not an abstract academic label that they're persuaded to believe in because some expert says so, but rather a first person realization insight that, yeah, I mean, whether I'm a good engineer or I'm good at running a team like Donnie is, what made Donnie successful? Did he learn to do that in school?
Definitely not.
Yeah,
but he did learn it.
But he did learn to do that, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't born to do that. It wasn't genetically endowed that he would do that. You know, it wasn't in his mom's food. You know, it was he learned to do that, right?
Yeah.
So whether somebody's really whatever their hobbies about, you know, making crochet or making a great meal or whatever it is that somebody thinks they're great about, that they take pride in, they got that from learning.
Yeah.
So when they continue to think of learning as this academic thing that happens, you know, abstractly and outside of the home, that's so misorienting their whole being.
I agree. I
Right?
agree. That's the whole thing, is that they misoriented. Yeah.
Yep. So the fundamental misorientation is related to the operative definition they have about learning, thinking of learning, again, like we talked about before, as if it's this ancillary mental utility for acquiring knowledge and skills, rather than it's the central dynamic through which I'm becoming who I'm becoming all of my life.
Yeah.
Right. So the more that they really get that, the more that that's true for them, that they see it, and that they're now on their own course of starting to see the world through that lens, see that in their children, see that in their spouse, see that in how they're going to deal with tomorrow's conflict with their mothers or with their spouses or with their bosses or whatever, that it's all about learning, right? The more that becomes real for them, then we can go on to the next part of the conversation, which is, well, all learning is not equal, right? Then we can start to get into Stutters and Miraculous Intersections and the difference between healthy modes of participation and self-sabotaging learning. Because kids that are in the back of the classroom wanting to avoid being noticed, they're learning all the time too. They're just learning in ways that are sabotaging their learning.
Yeah.
They're learning to get ever better at being invisible.
Yeah.
Right. So we're always learning. It's just that all the time, that all of that learning isn't necessarily good for us.
Right.
Right. So, but we can't get to that until we see learning as being more than what we do at school in some academic or professional compartmentalized way.
Yeah. This is for my way of thinking, like if we can help parents like Donnie to shift past school completely, right? Just bypass that and go to what you talk about. So the idea of miraculous intersections is kind of a bit further along this path of yours of learning about learning, right? Yeah. And it just but it's kind of exciting that we don't need to solve the problems happening at school necessarily. We can just, if we can help people get to that point of first person learning, and they kind of understand, they internally understand learning the way that you frame it, right? Then I think they're in a position to help their children, to steward the health of their own child's learning.
Right. Yeah.
But I think keep going, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to say that I think there are parents who want to help their children, but the way that learning has been framed in their own mind or experienced by them is holding them back from participating in their child's learning.
Yeah, I agree. That's the fulcrum, though. Because they love enough, they care enough, they're interested enough. Yeah. Right? They're just misoriented. And so that's why the key, the single biggest thing here is that orientation shift. The rest of it becomes pretty obvious once you got the right set of glasses on.
Well, that's what's exciting to me, is that it's just like a shift can just change literally change everything.
Yeah, I think so. I think,
Yeah.
that's the tagline on Learning Stewards, right? I mean, if we change how we think about learning, it will change how we learn about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fulcrum, that change is not, it is kind of the challenge, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's always been exactly. But, and part of that happens by just lowering the amount of inefficiency in the system so that learning isn't so difficult for kids, so that there's more of that. And part of it has to do with explicitly reorienting enough adults so that some kind of a snowball can grow out of that. But it takes all these things are, different parts of the same pool.
But the positive, hopeful message for me is that it's not as though you have parents who don't care about their children and we got to try to get them to care. That most parents deeply care and they want to help their own children, and maybe they have the ability built into them to learn how to learn and to learn how to guide or help their child.
Well, they're doing it all the time, but because they at earlier stages in their life shamed out of paying attention to learning or never learned to pay. Again, the toddler is not conscious of learning to speak better. The toddler is not conscious of learning to walk better, right? It's a proprioceptive extension of presence into new dimensions of function and capabilities, right? So they're not meta conscious. They're not aware of them doing it in the same way. What we're talking about is becoming aware of learning in a different way than the way it's been socialized / educated into us.
Right. And once parents can make that shift, they're a lot closer to being able to help their children than maybe they realize.
Yeah, I think they are. I think you're right. I mean, there's no question that there's an awful lot of parents that are so busy with the struggle of survival that they don't have the bandwidth, so to speak, but they do care. And if you can connect that care and that love, even in what time they do have available, and shift the way they're paying attention, they can be radically more effective in whatever time they do have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to just jump now? We've kind of laid some stuff.
Yeah, sure.
That we won't. You want to jump into Miraculous Intersection?
Sure. Everything that we've said up to this point, I think, is so important. I suddenly hear like echo feedback. Did you hear that? Oh, it's normal now.
I'm doing okay.
Okay, mine just my voice echoed back at me. I think everything that you said up till now is equally vitally important and beautiful and special, and okay, I'm happy. I don't know how you want to go into Miraculous Intersections. I love that we were in the flow and we just maybe keep going.
And we can still do that. I think one of the things that we can do is just record all this stuff, right? And then I'm recording this now, right?
Yeah.
And I can send it to you. You can download it. You can cut it up any way that you want to.
Okay.
Or if you don't have the time or don't want to do that, you tell me. You can scan it over and say where you want it cut, and I have the tools to cut it. And then you can either narrate a takeoff ramp into a particular focal point, right? Or we can do it by static slides, a conversation, blah, 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 about however you want to do that. I don't really care. I agree with let's keep it real, let's keep it authentic, let's keep it flowing, and let's orchestrate it somewhat to cover certain points that with enough isolation and focus that they could be lifted like jewels and set into these things.
Agreed.
Okay.
Just like if for me, I will get, my brain will get stuck if I'm thinking how to move into the next thing. If I'm thinking how, like a child, right? I think I think maybe it's a blessing that little babies can talk, because if they could, we'd send them to school to learn how to walk, and we'd be telling what to do, and they'd become conscious of it, and they just like sit down and not want to move again.
Yeah, and the same thing would be true. Same thing would be true about riding bikes, about doing all kinds of things. And that's the way I think about reading. It's as if, imagine we tried to teach kids to ride bikes like reading, and where we required them to or it's even to walk, where we ask them to have an analytical, abstract understanding of the mechanics of their knee as a precursor to walking,
Yeah.
right?
But this is the thing, though, is that there's so much complexity, right? If we had to understand the complexity, like just moving my hand, if I had to understand the complexity of everything involved and I had to manage that, we couldn't do a thing. And it's kind of miraculous how we do function, right? Anyway, so what I was saying is, like, if I have to think now we transitioning to miraculous intersections, then my brain will think, okay, I need to ask you a question, then I can't think straight. If we're in a conversation, it's easy for me to talk.
I just turned down my phone. It was just bing, bing, bing.
Sure. Okay. How would you like to transition into miraculous intersections? Do I need to ask you a question? How do we move forward naturally? Because I've bumped out of the flow of this.
Sure. If you had some questions, that's great. And if not, I can dive into it. So
yeah, I'm just like, I think actually, like the next time we talk, I want to go back to what you said earlier in this conversation, because maybe that's a better starting point for people who are listening to our, but all is okay. But for me, I'm really interested in maybe when I was a young teacher walking into a class and I'm trying to teach students, when they don't understand me, when there's a stutter, the way you frame it, maybe I expected learning to flow smoothly. And when there was a stutter, I viewed that as a problem, as maybe I don't know how to teach properly and feel insecure, and it can devolve into frustration with the student because why aren't they paying attention? Why don't they understand? And maybe without realizing it, I'm under pressure and I'm trying to prove I'm good enough, but then I focus that frustration on my student for not learning. Right. So maybe for many people, when they're helping a child learn and there is the stutter, they feel it negatively. What I love about your idea with miraculous intersections is that while they are learning, when the stutter occurs, our framework is, this is a positive event, a miraculous intersection, right? This thing that before
the opportunity is a miraculous intersection.
Right.
The opportunity.
But that creates the opportunity.
Yeah.
So when the problem occurs, maybe previously, when I was younger, I will view that as a disaster, as a problem. But now I can view that event as the opportunity as information about how best to help that person pass the stutter.
Right. Well, if we parse it out, the first thing to talk about, what do we mean by stutter, right?
Okay.
So for me, it's both about speech, right? Everybody's familiar with somebody that stutters, right? Where their speech stream is kind of punctuated in a non-fluid way, right? But we also all experience that technologically. We experience that when we're watching something on the stream and all of a sudden we're watching along in a movie or we're listening to a piece of music and all of a sudden it just stops abruptly, right? And kind of like leaves us in the lurch and then it picks up again. And so it's about a breakdown in the flow, the unfoldment, right? So when we're back to learning, when we're really in the flow of learning, right, there's as we talked about before, and that's why cycle of engagement is so important. I'll just drop a breadcrumb on that. We'll have to come back to that time, right? It's kind of an undercarriage to understanding the context of the stutter. But in the case of a stutter, the main thing is that what I mean by miraculous intersection is it is the greatest source of information that, like you were saying, as a teacher, when you're working with a student and the student stutters, that stutter is telling you where they're dropping out in relation to what you're doing, right? So you don't have any better, that's the best source of intelligence, information you can have as feedback, right? To calibrate, adjust, and adapt what you're doing to better engage them and keep them in the flow, right?
Yeah.
And this is where it begins. The miraculous part of it comes from. The miraculous part of the intersection is it's also the greatest source of intelligence for them to learn from, right? but only to the extent that your environment creates the opportunity for them to pay attention to it. If they feel when they're on the flow of something and a dropout happens, if they think, oh, something's wrong, I'm not good, you know, and it arouses all the negative emotional stuff, then they're just going to go off of on a tangent from whatever they were doing at the moment that they stuttered in the flow, so to speak, whatever they were learning from, and go off into kind of negative emotional arousal territory that's not going to help them. If they can recognize, however, that, wow, I'm starting to drop out. Something's not working. What's not working here? Right? If they can recognize that they're falling off the track, right? They're falling out of the flow, and then ask themselves questions about that, then they start to know what it is they need. And there's nothing more powerful you could do for a learner than help them to become meta aware of their learning and what they need to stay learning.
Yeah.
And if they can do that and then communicate that to you, it's even better than knowing about the stutter. Now you know about the internals of the stutter. And that's what forms this miracle of sorts between somebody who's providing and somebody who's learning, right, in that field.
Right, right. Yeah, I love the idea of that. It's freeing for me. And I was thinking about in terms of like, if I'm working with the child one-on-one, maybe it's quite different from if I have a group, right? But I like you said just now, like part of it is for me to recognize, but part of it is helping my students over time to recognize when they're dropping out of learning.
I would argue
find their way back.
Having the students recognize that is vastly more important, because the more the students recognize that, the more autonomously powerful they are as learners, and the more that they are able to help you help them.
I agree. I'm thinking in context of my students, when they join me, they can't speak English. We can't communicate or interact. So a lot of it happens kind of non-verbally, right? So maybe in the beginning, I have to be aware.
Yes.
And my students are with me for 5, 10, 15 years. And so part of the process is maybe in the beginning, I have to be aware of it. But the great power is from helping each individual student learn to learn like from inside out, like you say.
Yeah.
And then like if they're working like four children in a group, and each one of them has the ability to recognize when they're dropping out and to feel where they're kind of losing track. They've got other people they can reach out to as resources to help them.
Yeah.
So the real power of a time is each individual learner has this ability to learn if we help them to recognize it.
Yeah, I think that the difficult thing here to really get is how important it is to make that more important than anything else at all times, because making that more important than everything else can help everything else more than anything else.
Yeah.
Right. The more that they're aware of, you know, the more that they're meta aware of their own flow and what it is they need to stay in it, right? The more powerful they are in every way, whether it's talking to their friends to get help, or it's expressing something that's a kind of creative surge impulse that comes up in them, or it's asking you a question. I mean, as you know well, the heart of science, the heartbeat of science is a well-articulated question. Right? I mean, it's what drives everything, right? And it's what a learner can do to most empower themselves, is to be aware of what is it they need, what's working and what's not working right now, as I'm paying attention to what's going on. And unfortunately, because this goes back to the Insidious Curriculum and the other things we've talked about, because the general environments that children are in aren't aware of what we're talking about, and don't try even to respond to what we're talking about. Children are learning, you know, I would argue millions of times if you put it together by the time they get out of school. They've had millions of these fluctuations, learning need fluctuations, and they've just blurred out to it because there's nothing they can do about it. Nobody else seems to care about it.
Yeah.
And that's what's tanking the learning in our population, not the lack of a good math instruction course, right?
Right.
It's that pervasive quality of not helping the learners participate in their learning in a healthy way, and being able to harness that. Because if you can get kids to do that, right? If you can get kids to become aware of their learning and meaning needs and be able to express them, right? They will not learn to express them if they don't have the opportunity to express them, because the environment doesn't care or can't respond to them, right? It'll just dull out. But if they can learn to express them, then that's a whole new power that you have as an educator to help them in learning about anything you want to help them learn about.
Yeah.
It's generally relevant to everything.
I agree. My next question would be, how do we help them develop that awareness, the meta awareness of their own first person learning? How do we get, like, how do we get them onto that path of becoming aware?
You've got a special circumstance because you've got a language gap that's not
generally
you have to model for them the dropout process, right? So
okay.
Reading along, so a teacher could do this comically almost, right? Like reading a lesson and say, oh boy, that just reminded me of this, and demonstrate tangent migrations, right? Or demonstrate shame aversions, right? Demonstrate this stuff so that the kids will identify, oh yeah, I know what that is. That happens to me all the time. I'm reading something and all of a sudden my mind goes boom, or I don't want to talk because I'm afraid, or I didn't know that word, so I jumped over it thinking maybe I'll get it later, and then all of a sudden I drifted away, So if you deconstruct your own learning process, this is why I say before, it's so important for the teachers themselves to become more meta-conscious of their own learning. Because if they're not meta-conscious of their own learning in the ways that we're talking about, they can't come from an authentic place in communicating this. And if they are, they can't help but communicate this.
Right.
Yeah. They'll have to gravitate to following some pedagogical speech pattern of trying to train kids about this. But if it's not real for them, it's not going to be contagious, and it's not going to be part of how they authentically differentiate what they're doing. It'll be only part of the protocol that they're instructed to instruct from.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That gives me enough to move forward. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah. I think maybe maybe we'll cut there for this part.
Yep.
But I'm still learning this. I'm still learning. I know we're always still learning.
That was Michelangelo's. Right?
Still learning, right?
You talk to me. I'm still learning. Great statue work, right?
You made me think of Douglas Adams, the well-articulated question. Like the answer is 42, but we didn't know what the question was. And without the question, the answer maybe is meaningless. But this whole thing of how to guide learners is, I have to become meta aware of my own learning structure, of how I'm learning, right?
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, this is the conversation we've had before. The difference between first person learning about learning by paying attention to your learning, and learning about your own fluctuations of attention, of aversion, of migration, right? Of needing something and blowing it off versus needing something and following it, and all of that stuff that's regulating the core of your learning. The more that you become aware of that, right? The more that you become interested in becoming more aware of that, the more that you learn about that. That's so different than having a abstract map on the wall about what learning is.
Yeah, but everything you say, I feel it at varying levels, and I like there's habits built into my body that I practice unconsciously. The ping is fine. I like that sound. The it's
Don't.
just that is that like I feel like I know what you're saying and I can feel the beauty of it and it excites me, and then but I feel it on different levels more deeply, and it's still spreading out. And
I noticed when you said that you almost said but, you almost got all the way through the word but, and then you pulled off from it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's it. That's important.
Yeah.
Right. And whatever the but is fine. Because it reveals something, right?
Sure. It's so like it's not a complaint. It's exciting that it's like layers.
Yeah.
Like layers coming off, and just before this, you maybe need to go soon, but before this podcast, before any conversation with any adult, before I will feel kind of stressed and nervous. And maybe when I had the podcast with Judith Epstein, it took me like 3 or 4 months to prepare to feel ready to even face it, right? And our early conversations, I felt overwhelmed to even step into a conversation with you. And then when we first agreed that we will do this podcast, a little part of me will rise up and think, I like try to anticipate what should I do to prepare so that it's perfect, I suppose. And then another part of me said, I don't need to. I can let go of that, because we're learning. Like, there's nothing I have to do. I don't have to prove something to you or to anybody else or to myself. I just have to show up, and we're going to interact with each other, and you will treat me with respect and gently, and it doesn't matter how I show up. So like, maybe like for me, this morning when I woke up, I just felt happy and excited to have this conversation without tension, without pressure, without stress. And that's taken almost 50 years to have that shift. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and you're right. This is about kind of going with the flow, because in the flow is everything we need to learn, really. There's a different, if we were going to try to talk about how to make a aircraft jet engine function more efficiently, right? Then I'd say, let's get the schematic up together and have ourselves a really good conversation about this. It may take us into physics and mathematics and structural, metallurgical, whatever's, right? But here we're talking about something else. Ultimately, we're talking about the health of one's inside out participation in the flow of their learning.
Yeah.
And we're always doing that.
Yeah.
So it's always
and you said before, nothing is more important than that. So if we are doing a podcast, it doesn't matter. The podcast is not more important than our experience of learning together.
Yeah, and in the course of that, the epiphanies that arise from that kind of connection and that kind of authenticity of sharing and that kind of meta sharing about learning in the flow, what else could we provide people that could be more valuable?
Yeah.
Right? Because if they're looking for follow step 1, follow step 2, follow step 3, I really don't want to think about it. Thank you. Just tell me the steps. Yeah. I don't have any time for that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I understand there's part of you that's got to do that. Right.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And there's my version of that is the technology stuff that I do.
Yeah.
Right. Which is about kind of making a simple system that can do that. But in terms of the people that are going to really be helpful and that are really be able to hear and have the ability to do anything with what we're talking about, the first requirement is to start paying attention to themselves from the inside out. so that what we're talking about isn't some abstract thing on the wall, isn't some abstract thing like the jet engine. It's happening in front of them. In the learning stewards thing, which we talked about, the first part being, first of all, change the definition of learning. Second, understand the difference between healthy and adaptive and unhealthy and maladaptive learning, right? The self-sabotaging and all that stuff. And the next distinction is between natural and artificial, which we're not going to touch right now because that's a whole big field. But finally, what it leads to is there's no substitute for first-person learning. It just isn't.
Yeah.
You can't delegate your learning.
Yeah.
You know? You can't do it.
Yeah. It seems like you can't learn to walk for a baby. The baby has to.
Baby's got to do it themselves,
its
right?
own body.
Exactly. And the same
The
thing.
more you help, the more you take away the baby's ability to learn.
Yeah. Now there's a I don't know.
Helping at the right level.
I don't know if you've seen, there's the video that I used, the helping a baby learn to walk as an example of whole
With the fingers.
With the fingers, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So you're giving them a reference to stabilize themselves with, but you're not pushing or pulling, right?
Yeah.
You're weightless, what I call weightless at the interface.
Yeah.
You're there without imposing anything on them other than creating a reference for them to sense and extend themselves with.
You're helping as little as possible, as much as is needed, right?
Yep.
Helping them to learn by themselves.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what if parents that really want to do something for their kids can't delegate their own learning to do it, right? So the parent that really wants to help, a parent that recognizes that their child is going to become who their child learns to become in every way, their happiness, their health, their wealth, in every measure of it, you know, it's going to be, the child's going to get from where they are to their wealth and health and relationships and happiness and all of that stuff because they learn to get to that, right? And they're not going to learn to do that in school. They're going to learn to do that in life.
Yeah.
Right. So if they want to help their child at that level, they can't do it unless they're aware of themselves and they're paying attention to themselves at the level that we're talking about. All they can do, you know, it's like they can follow a formula and in that sense, maybe do less harm.
But often they're following an internal formula from their own experiences.
Yeah, typically
negative ways to affect their children.
Yeah, I find most adults, and this was true for me for the first couple of my kids. You know, this is what I was too. You're either just like your parents or you're anti like your parents. You're 180.
Yeah, a reaction to your parents.
Yeah, but either way, you're still in the arc of reactive or following through with what happened to you.
Yeah,
you have to get free of that.
I think what I was trying to say earlier is that, like, the sensation I had today beginning this podcast is like that feeling in my solar plexus, that pressure, that stress is like releasing, you know, just, yeah.
Have you been practicing the breathe into it? And
yes.
Yeah.
I want to maybe we can do that one day as a podcast, because I'd like you to talk me through it again. Yes, I'd like you to talk me through that again. Okay. But I have been as well as I can understand and remember what you told me, and I feel that does help me.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is a delight. I'm really enjoying this too, and it's going to be helpful to people later. I know it. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I kind of, part of what I feel is that I'd almost like to, future podcasts or even this podcast, we have a conversation and we just drop it as it is. Just share it, the whole thing. We can pull out parts of this to
I'm fine
share
with that
as
too.
clips. Yeah. But I just, exactly the way we did it today, just share it with people. This is what we're doing. We're interacting and talking about things and learning together, and there's no script. it doesn't.
I think it would be great, especially, but it also would be helpful, I think, to have a kind of a maybe 10 bullet topic with time stamps relative to the time of the whole, so that if somebody did find some part, they could navigate back to it or tell a friend.
Okay.
You would like part 3 at 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
That you can talk me through how to set up that structure. But I think I would love to be able to take the whole chunk and just share it, because there's a flow in the energy of what we went through that I would enjoy to watch again.
Good. Okay. I will send you this. If not tonight, tomorrow. And then I'll send instructions by text about some ways to think about how to deal with it. Okay.
Just one last thing is that if we can just turn on the Zoom call and just speak, and it's easier. There's no pressure. There's no stress. It's just we're just gonna have a conversation, and where it goes, that's where it goes, right? And then I want to have that some tension holding me back, worrying about what I should or shouldn't do, or do it.
I'm fine with that. I prefer. The only thing is, this is the way I did Children of the Code interviews, right? Is that I would go to meet with whomever I was talking with, and I would spend the first 15 or 20 minutes asking them questions about themselves, so they could get all the things that they were, kind of pent up to said. Just get that ventilated, and then we could drop into having a conversation.
Okay.
Right. So we don't have to do that. We've done all that.
Right.
But the point was that the conversations got their best. If you read the interviews, the part where they get juicy is when we start having a real conversation that gets right on the edge, not of what they profess, but the edge of what they're learning.
This is something I actually wanted to bring up to you, and we can save this for a later date. Is I wanted to ask you what was your process for those interviews? I know some of them you would have email conversations before, and maybe pre-ask questions before you got there. And so when you walked in, like you said, because that's what I found profound about those interviews, is that it's completely different from other interviews. You just got onto that edge, and you're communicating deeply about something that I think maybe some of those people didn't really talk about with other people.
Yeah, I had that sense, partly because they didn't, some of them did their homework and knew who I was before I got there. Most of them didn't. Most of them they just thought, okay, there's a guy doing a documentary on reading,
Yeah.
And that, and there were a few people that kind of had some sense of where I was going to go and what I was interested in.
But I was just excited by how you did it. And like when you talk to children, they will share ideas about shame and what they feel that maybe their teachers are completely unaware of, and how you meet somebody and in a very short period of time are able to get to the meat, get to a real touching point.
Yeah, I think you have to ventilate the pressure, like you were talking about, this coming into a situation where you feel this pressure or you got this backlog of gotta do's, you gotta do this. And so you got to get that dissipated so you can drop to a level. And then, it's about, asking questions and learning together, not being there to push up an opinion or to be pushed by an opinion, but rather to be finding a way to get on exactly that edge, because that's where the juice is. Like I told you, in the beginning, the instigation of all this for me in a way was growing up thinking somebody out there knows, whatever it is, somebody out there got that nailed, that's done, that's known, that's known, because that it is so-ness permeates everything, right? And yet, you get to the edge of anything vital, from consciousness to, the nature of physics or the universe or life, and it's a raging debate, which means that it's fully alive with state-of-the-art, living, bleeding edge learning right now, everything that's vital.
But that's exciting, but almost a little bit concerning that the experts out there aren't necessarily experts.
What they are is
they are
specialized learners working in a
Yeah.
particular field.
I worry about politicians and their learning.
Well,
we can talk about that another time.
yeah, the problem with politics is that learning is not appreciated.
Yeah, and they have a very strongly driven agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to come back to, I mean, ultimately, I was just having this conversation earlier today. Every major problem human beings face, whether it's climate or it's biohazard or it's war or it's economics, or every problem is a consequence of transgenerational learning. It didn't just fall off the truck to hit us yesterday.
Yeah.
These things have been, we're the edge of a wave that's been going on for centuries, and we're just a snapshot in time of this big flow. And we learned to get into this mess.
Right.
And the only way out of it is to change the learning dynamics that got us here.
Yeah.
Right. And politics hasn't been concerned with that.
Like the problem is that there are people that even if they know a better way, their bread and butter, their power is from their position and from maybe the standpoint they present to the people who elect them.
Yeah.
So like there might be people who know exactly, like, who can see the big picture, who can see where this is going wrong, but in the short term, by presenting an agenda in a certain way, is going to get them the support to have a position of power.
Yeah, well, you just described a lot of life of teachers too.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I think that we've got to break this paradigm free, right? At all of these levels. I mean, if you think about the international competition, the way nations develop, right? The future of the world belongs to the nations that are going to have the most impact, most influence, most force, most, chops in the future will be the ones that learn to. It's going to be about, national security is going to be about national intelligence in the people sense, right? It's going to be, how collectively intelligent are you?
Yeah.
And we have been stupidifying the populations politically.
Yeah. But
anyway, that is another whole big kettle of fish.
Almost
right
oblivious
now,
of the fact that we are.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. I mean, let's wrap this here. We'll we'll send this off.
Thank you, David.
And then let's have a sidebar over the next couple of days about group design and stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take
care. It's been a pleasure. Bye now.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.